Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for part one of our hearing series on creating affordable housing, the state and local relationship. Commissioners, I'm turning on the ability to start your video and audio.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the public hearing, the Little Hoover Commission public hearing on creating affordable, the state and local relationship. Today is August 26th of 21. I'm Pedro Nava, and I'm the chair of the Little Commission. Again, thank you all for joining us today. Introduce the other commissioners who are here with us, whom or will be joined shortly. Sean Varner, Dion Aroner, Bill Emerson, Kathy Schwamberger, and Janice, as well as I understand Senator Jim Nielsen and Assemblymember will just as soon as they finish their duties on part of the legislature. We also have with us commission staff, Executive Director Ethan Rarick, Deputy Executive Director Tamar Foster, Project Managers Crystal Beckham and Tristan Stein, Analyst Sherry McAllister, Ashley Hurley, and Rachel Mattioli, as well as intern Saeed Murad. Let's do a little bit of housekeeping before we turn to the subject of our meeting today. The commissioners' audio and video will be turned on throughout the duration of this hearing. Commissioners, you may mute if you wish. Please remember to unmute yourself if you want to make a comment or ask a question during the meeting. As is my practice, I will look on the scene, and if I see that you're unmuted, I will take that as an indication that you want to make a or ask a question. The video audio of our hearing witnesses will be turned on when it is their turn to present. Members of the public will be muted during. We will have public comment session at the start. Those who wish to make a comment will be unmuted during the public comment session. If you'd like to make a public comment, please use the raised hand feature in Zoom by clicking on the hand icon to join our public comment queue. Those who have joined us by phone may either dial #9 to raise their hand on Zoom or send an email to littlehoover@lhc.ca. that you want to address. You provide the phone number from which you are in the meeting so that our staff knows who to unmute. Staff will be monitoring raised hands and emails requesting comment through the duration of the hearing. As is usual at commission hearings, public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. We are recording today's hearing, and after the hearing, staff will place a permanent link to the recording on our website and upload it to our YouTube channel and our Facebook page. And now to the substance of our hearing. This will be the first of 3 commission hearings on how to strengthen the state and local relationship to increase the supply of affordable housing. Today's hearing will focus on voices from outside of government. I think it's appropriate to let everybody know that Commissioner Schwaber will serve as chair of this subcommittee, and Dion Aroner has agreed to assist her in this task. The California Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, determined that the state must create 1.8 million new housing units between 2015 and 25 to meet its housing needs. The state is 2/3 of the way through that timeline, and there are challenges ahead. Sometimes local opposition to additional housing succeeds in reducing the supply. In the meantime, Californians find that there is high demand for housing, thereby increasing the cost of. That demand is driven by a multitude of, many beyond the reach of state government. California state and local governments work closely together to increase the supply of safe, affordable housing in the locations where Californians need it. Today, we will hear perspectives from stakeholders outside government on facilitating the creation of affordable housing. In the next month, we will hold 2 additional hearings on this topic, learning and gaining perspectives from state and local government. This hearing was organized by Project Manager Crystal Beckham. Hi, Crystal. And I'd like to ask Crystal to please introduce our first witness.
Thank you, Pedro. I just have one follow-up question. You had mentioned that we were starting with public comments today. So are you reordering the agenda?
Right, I'm going to blame whoever wrote those talking points.
Mr. Chairman, my apologies. We made an error in your materials and failed to note that we should have public comment first. So that is my mistake. But we can go to public comment now. Crystal is correct that we should do that actually under the agenda. So again, my apologies. Let me just repeat for members of the public, if you wish to make public comment, either use the raised hand function in Zoom. I believe those instructions are going up on the screen now, or email us, do so immediately at littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov. Indicate the phone number from which you are calling so we know who to unmute. And again, in keeping with our traditional practice, public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. So if you make public comment, 3 minutes only. At this point, let me ask Ashley if anyone has raised their hand or if we have had any fast emails that have come in indicating a desire to make public comment.
No, we have no request for public comment at this time. Oh, we just received one request for public comment. So let me start with Bruce. Bruce, I'm turning on your ability to talk.
Go ahead, sir. Is he unmuted, Ashley? Oh, there you go.
Thank you. Bruce Wick with the Housing Contractors of California, very interested in this topic. And I think it's important for the public to have a real differentiation in terminology. And, you know, I know obviously Little Hoover Commission does great and thorough studies, so I know you will. Affordable housing, creating affordable housing, that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. Is there housing affordability is an issue? Does that mean market rate housing is any part of that, or subsidized housing where some of that cost or a lot is offset by government folks? So if we can be really careful in how we present the wording, the verbiage on what we're trying to do, because market rate housing needs to jump a lot. And there's a lot of things, especially from the contractor side. You just held a hearing on PAGA. Those PAGA claims increase our costs significantly. A lot of the regulatory environment increases construction costs based on contractors. So looking at the various parts of market rate housing affects affordability. But then if we talk about creating affordable housing through the government in some subsidized way, a real issue is putting verbiage called skilled and trained workforce, which almost requires 90% of the time that to be a union workforce. And a lot of affordable housing just doesn't pencil out. So a lot of times the government says, we're going to fund this housing, but a skilled and trained workforce is required, and therefore the housing never gets built. So I hope you take those comments as you walk through this process, and appreciate very important topic that you're taking this on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ashley, do we have any other public comment for us?
We have no additional requests for public comment at this time.
So, Mr. Chairman, I believe we can close that portion of the agenda and move on to the witness testimony with your permission.
Of course, thank you.
So, and now again, my apologies for our error. So Crystal, if you can introduce the first witness, please.
Great, thank you. Our first witness is Denise Pinkston, who is the founder and president of the Casita Coalition, and she's also a partner with TMG Partners. Welcome, Denise, and when you're ready, please unmute yourself and begin your testimony.
Good morning. Thank you for hearing testimony from people who build housing in the important topic of affordable housing. Just briefly, my career over 35 years now has spanned local government planning, where I was a manager of a current planning department and included purview over a redevelopment agency, housing subsidies, federal housing programs, and planning related functions like code enforcement, environmental review, et cetera. And when I left local government, I moved into the private sector and now am a partner in a mixed use urban infill firm based in the Bay Area, TMG Partners. Our company currently builds market rate and some occasional subsidized affordable housing throughout the 9-county Bay Area, as well as offices and other products. And my experience, both in local government and in the professional development world, has taught me that the barriers to housing are nigh on insurmountable, and that the political will and ability to coordinate levels of government to make it more feasible hasn't existed. And to the extent we're solving problems, we're not necessarily solving the right problems. And that set of frustrations drove me to be an Uber housing volunteer. I've been on all sorts of housing committees in the Bay Area, including the Committee to House the Bay Area, and most recently worked on all of the state ADU laws as a technical advisor and drafter to a number of different legislators, and most recently founded the Casita Coalition to promote a vision of California that is inclusive, equitable, and sustainable by promoting small, gentle infill housing forms in every neighborhood, meaning every neighborhood, not just the neighborhoods who are willing to say yes, because these housing forms are naturally affordable, they cost less, they work everywhere at a price point everyone can afford. So that's, in a nutshell, my personal journey in housing wonderland. And I'm here to answer any questions, but also to offer you my testimony. Crystal, can you promote my slides? And I'll just click through them quickly. This is a slide presentation that I have prepared for you here, but been giving really at a number of forums statewide, including the Urban and Land Institute and other forums, to just explain the big picture on the housing crisis. And the thesis I promote is that everything about the way we build housing in California is right-sized to guarantee we will never have enough of it. And what we need to think about is systems thinking to right-size to get plenty of housing, which is difficult and requires us to step back and think about the whole housing ecosystem. Next slide. Oh yeah, click through these. These are just examples of headlines from the Legislative Analyst's Office, which has done great work on the housing crisis. And if you haven't already reviewed the reports, I highly commend them to you. But in a nutshell, from a practitioner, here's why scarcity is embedded in every aspect of housing regulation and delivery. For a builder, there are just too many barriers in the process to get it done at scale, to do a lot of it. It takes too long, it's too hard, it's too risky. Because it's so risky and hard, capital demands a premium. It's hard to get land, it's hard to get approvals. Communities, generally speaking, don't welcome new housing, particularly in the urban areas where our state land use policies say it should go. And housing that works on the math, and here I'm talking about market rate housing. You know, back in my government days, when housing didn't work on the math, i.e. you lost money, we developed a euphemism for saying you fill the gap. There's a gap between what it's worth by the time you build it and what people can afford to pay for it, what it's worth on the market. And if you're a market rate builder building without public subsidy, housing that works on the math is limited in time and geography. You cannot build all housing everywhere at all points in time, which means that you get fewer houses at fewer places at fewer moments in time. And the first reason is costs are too high. High costs require prices that few in the population can afford. So you can't feasibly build in all markets at value at where the housing is worth more than what people can afford to pay. So we're building housing for the wealthier end of the income spectrum. It's risky. And as a result, there aren't enough people who earn that kind of money in every place to build consistently through all market cycles. So housing is a major boom bust cycle industry. And during the bust cycle, nothing gets done. You lay off most of your labor, companies go bankrupt, deals go under, banks take them back, and things kind of stop like they are stopping now in most multifamily housing in many parts of the state. And there is never going to be enough subsidy dollars to fill the gap for all the projects that don't work on the math. Whether they're affordable, built by affordable builders, or whether it's market rate housing that doesn't work and has no source of subsidy. So we concentrate our building into the boom cycles when everyone hurries up to build as much as they can because prices are high. But that also means the limited supply of contractors, subs, inspectors, and materials are super busy during a short window of time. And during the down cycle, everyone has to go away, which exacerbates labor shortages. Contractors can't stay busy during the down cycle. Union workers cannot stay employed during the down cycle unless there's always a shortage of union labor that makes them more valuable in the up cycle and employable in the down cycle, because there just aren't very many of them. So we have this chronic supply scarcity and a delivery engine that guarantees a certain amount of scarcity while we are adding skyrocketing job and population growth, which means that people who need housing can't get it from new housing. So they're moving into neighborhoods that used to be more affordable, and causing gentrification and displacement. And just, you read in the popular press, oh, there's a new building coming, it's causing gentrification and displacement. That is not true. A new building is only possible because gentrification has already happened in that market and prices have already risen to the point where new construction works on the math. And then finally, just a footnote, short-term rentals aren't helping us either in tourist parts of the state. The vacancy rate, for example, in Fort Bragg, California is 0, less than 1%. And all the rental housing that used to be available is now being rented as Airbnb. So our regulatory scheme is sized to make sure we just don't have enough housing for the people that need it. Next slide. And so just click through this quickly. So what do I mean when I say housing doesn't work? Stop there. What I mean is that if the market value of a house is $750,000 and it costs more than $750,000 to build it, the builder won't build. So for example, in a Central Valley community, a single family home is worth 750 grand. If a builder runs the math initially at underwriting, looks at all the costs, has money left over after the cost to pay for the land, and the landowner is willing to accept that land price, in this case, it's a 200 unit project, $50,000 a door for land, $10 million for the land. If the seller will sell for $10 million, we have a theoretically feasible deal, we can proceed. If things change, or if community A is feasible, but community B has a $20,000 extra mitigation impact fee, or construction costs have moved 10% since you first looked at it, all of a sudden you have negative land value for housing and the buyer refuses to sell, or the deal goes under, or it sits on a shelf for a while until pricing goes up above $750,000 and can cover the cost. This is the basic underwriting every builder does looking at every deal. And in my company, 95% of the deals we have looked at in the 9-county Bay Area don't work right here in the office on a piece of paper. The math doesn't work. It isn't worth at the end of the day what it costs to build. Next slide. So high costs are also guaranteeing scarcity because we can only build for the highest income people in any given market. This is the demand bell curve of people in the East Bay looking for housing. And you'll see the bulge of the population is in that middle band. That's the middle income, median income population. Affordable builders build at the first green arrow. It says affordable here, 80% of AMI and less. So they're building for that portion of the population whose housing choices are even harder and more difficult. So good that someone's taking care of that. And new builders are dropping in as the bell curve smooths down to the very narrowest part of it, which is where new construction works, i.e. no one's building for the middle. Next slide. And as a result, if your housing budget is fixed at $3,000 a month, that's all you can pay. So you can't rent or pay for 1,000 square foot house, which would be, $5,000 or $6,000 a month in rent or equivalent payments. So you go into the existing housing market to look for housing options. And this is what we call in the economics, the missing middle. It's most of our population who earn too much for affordable housing, cannot afford new housing, move into existing housing, gentrify those neighborhoods. And it's happening in every community in the Bay Area and now all over the state. When I began my career, 120% of AMI was market. Today market in the Bay Area is over 200% of AMI. Next slide. And everyone is paying, as a result, much more of their income. Click through these for all the images to appear. Here you go. Too much of their income, meaning up to 50% of their income for shrinking houses or longer commutes. So what happened to the middle? Our rules, our costs, our impact fees and mitigations have become more and more burdensome on market rate housing, to the point that the more complicated the building is, the more expensive it is to build. And most people can only afford a simple building. The building equivalent of a VW Bug would be a single family home, stick frame, usually built non-union today in California, no elevators, no ADA, no complex fire life safety systems. Think single family homes in the Central Valley, accessory dwelling units, duplexes. They work because they're simple and people understand them, can build them for less. They also tend to be low density and being built, at least for single family homes, in green fields of the state, and contravene a lot of our environmental policies. The things we're driving to, higher densities, are more expensive on an exponential basis every time you step up in a bigger building types, till you get to mid-rises and high rises that only work in the state's most expensive markets. So for example, the Richmond waterfront planned priority development area has zoned for mission-based style mid-rise housing and had no takers, because the housing prices in Richmond for existing housing in the community are so the new mid-rise building in Richmond, even though it's near the ferry and even though BART is proximate. So that's just not going to work. Next slide. You can zone for things, but you can't make them come if the math doesn't work. So what does right sizing to plenty look like? Well, one thing for sure that has to be on the agenda is more lower cost, naturally affordable, smaller sized, middle housing styles in every community. This would be duplexes to fourplexes. Our zoning allowed it in many California communities. This kind of housing exists in older communities throughout the state. And after World War II, became illegal under zoning for a variety of historic reasons. These kinds of buildings tend to be feasible in more places, in more cycles, for a greater range of income, just because they're simpler and they cost less. Next slide. And this basic math is one of the reasons why I personally got involved in accessory dwelling units, because accessory dwelling units always work on the math in virtually every place. And as I prepared in my written remarks, whereas a market rate unit today in a multifamily building costs $700,000 or $800,000 a unit to produce, an accessory dwelling unit today costs $200,000 or less, or it can. And there's headlines to the effect that, you know, Elon Musk is trying to build a factory-built ADU in a company in Texas that he promises to deliver for $50,000 a door. So what do we have to do to right size to plenty? We need to allow more of these building types in every community. We can't just focus all state housing policy on dense, urban, expensive, and most people can't afford. We need to allow homes in all kinds of neighborhoods. We can no longer say single family or commercial properties in the state are off limits. And the state needs to have some uniform standards across all communities. Otherwise, a few cities try really, really hard to solve the housing crisis, while many cities refuse to do anything. And you cannot solve a crisis of the magnitude of California's housing crisis if a few cities are trying and a lot are not. Everyone needs to be pulling together to make a big enough dent to actually solve the crisis. We need more streamlining. It needs to be faster, easier, you know, less discretion, more ministerial permits. And any requirements for streamlining cannot come with super expensive price tags. Value capture, affordable housing that means middle income housing never works. All union labor is what the person at the public mic testified. Some streamlining needs to come in some places so that it is fast and economically viable for projects. And then we need to start sharing our public costs equally. California charges the highest mitigation impact fees and connection charges of any state in the United States. We charge upwards of $50,000 to $150,000 per new unit of housing for the privilege of contributing to solving the housing crisis in the state. These fees and impositions make housing infeasible in a number of communities. There's good data that shows San Francisco, which has some of the highest value capture in the state. One publication called it a zoning tax of $400,000. The impact fees alone, plus the inclusionary housing requirements, exceed a cost of $150,000 to $200,000 per door. Those impositions mean that the only new housing in San Francisco that works is either subsidized or luxury. And today, even the luxury housing is hung up and can't get to the start of a new building because there aren't that many super wealthy people, even in San Francisco, who will pay luxury housing prices to live in one of the fastest growing job centers in the state, the home of much of our innovation and technology, and one of the most desirable places for young people to move. And we're not building, most big projects are just on hold right now until rents recover, the economy recovers, and more luxury housing demand materializes in San Francisco. That can't be true. We cannot be producing housing. Sorry, yes.
Hello, this is Pedro. And I want to ask some questions because we'll prompt other commissioners to jump in as well, so that we can sort of, get the benefit of your experience. But can you tell us, based on what you have seen, who's doing it right? I mean, if the Little Hoover Commission wanted to get in touch with a municipality, a state, a country where they're doing it right, where would we look?
San Diego, just to take a California example, is doing a fabulous job balancing impositions with incentives to get a lot more housing. For example, the state has a density bonus law, and it works in some places, but not others, because the amount of density you get is not enough to offset the cost of the affordability in lots of places. San Diego created I call it a supercharged density bonus with more bonus density, more waivers, so waiving certain requirements. And as a result, they are getting a lot of more dense urban infill housing in their downtown core through that supercharged density bonus program. They've also been experimenting with density bonus, and they're getting affordable housing as well. They've experimented with the equivalent in the ADU space, where for every second ADU you create, one of them has to be affordable. So it's kind of like a density bonus for ADUs. And they call it unlimited ADUs, but I think, maybe you get 2 or 3, or I don't know how many per lot, but they're getting 40% of their ADUs in San Diego are now deed restricted affordable units for moderate income families for a period, I think, of 5 years with no public subsidy. So San Diego is a great model, and they have managed to streamline some of their CEQA processes so that permits don't take 10 years. And, a lot of litigation. So San Diego is a great model.
Yeah, that's very helpful. The other thing that occurs to me is, as we looked at, single family homes, and everybody recognizes that for most people, the single family home is the largest asset that an individual has, with the intention, I think for most, I know it applies in our family, that we want to hold on to that so that we can pass that on to our children, which is one of the ways that has been recognized that families can generate wealth. And if you take a look at historically what has happened with families of color, that has been denied them through any variety of means. So it seems to me that in some communities, the opposition to housing is not necessarily well-founded, but based on fear that housing will cause a depreciation in the value of that single family home. Now, have you seen any recipes, for lack of a better term, where it's successfully been able to allay those fears that people have, that if you build housing in my neighborhood, my home will depreciate?
Those fears are real. They are widespread. I completely agree with what you're laying out. I think that the advantage of accessory dwelling units as a policy space is it's very homeowner controlled, right? The homeowner is essentially choosing a housemate that lives in a different house. And it's a shared living situation that allows intergenerational living, so parents and grandparents. It allows a lot of people building ADUs are first-time home buyers. And the only way they can pay the mortgage is with the income from the ADU or by sharing the mortgage with a family member. So they get out of their other housing, they pull their income together, they get a house and an ADU. So it's actually re-enabling home ownership in some communities. And our builders report many of their clients are first-time home buyers who are looking for a place to add an ADU. I think some of the fear is based, and just on the math, ADUs are not diminishing the value of single-family homes. So that's just not accurate as a factual matter. So I don't know if that helps. I think fear can be stoked and fear can be allayed. Mm-hmm. And one of the missions of the Casita Coalition is to show people that this is a helpful policy that could help them and their families and give them an example of a family that maybe they see themselves in.
Right.
So we have if you look at our website, we have a YouTube video called Why ADU, and it focuses on a lot of different households across this, this was a Bay Area group, but different households in different cities who help their families take care of themselves by adding a separate housing unit. And I think just telling those kinds of stories and particularly communicating through videos helps people see that this isn't scary, that it actually can help them or at least help their neighbors in their community. And the third point is that where this has been done elsewhere, I'm talking now just about ADUs, it's been very popular. There was a lot of fear, a lot of worry that it would be bad, but it hasn't rolled out that way. So New South Wales, Australia allows every accessory dwelling unit by building permit, and they have for a long time. Vancouver, British Columbia has been doing this. And that's how families are living in the city now. They couldn't afford $1 million home. They're living in they call it a laneway house up there. So I think sometimes you have to manage fear by showing people that what they're afraid of actually isn't so scary after all.
Yeah, I mean, I have, there are 2 or 3 ADUs in my neighborhood. And I can say, I mean, I can't tell you how many, because they're done in such a way that they're not that noticeable. And with respect to, impacts in the neighborhood itself, I certainly haven't seen any change. So, I think you're right. It can be a viable way to increase the housing stock. And pardon me for the interruption.
No, it's great. I was actually on my last slide. Just to share another anecdote, the reason that I lit on the idea of state ADU laws is prior to that law, both my neighbors, I live in Berkeley, a lot of student housing illegally in people's backyards. That's how most grad students stay in town, is they live in an illegal ADU. My block had 3 of them, like your neighborhood. And the tenants would hide. You kind of see them, the building official would be on the street in a city truck and they'd all kind of furtively sneak into the backyard. It was the biggest secret on the block, right? We all knew, we all pretended we didn't know. And it occurred to me, we're making our neighbors be scofflaws. I am forcing good people who are just trying to take care of themselves and their families to be worried that I'm going to turn them in, and why would I do that to my neighbors? Just so I have the right to boss them around about what they can do on their property. And it's like, well, that's just wrong. In this day and age, if they want to rent to a student, or next door is the block grandma, she's there all the time. She tells us when to take our trash out in the ADU. 2 blocks down is a Persian family with a refugee living in the back. This is how California is housing itself right now. And we should just admit it, right? Stop pretending it's not there and make it legal. So good people aren't made into criminals, So
No, you're right. I lived in a place some time ago where I had an occasion, I don't live there anymore, but had occasion to go up on my roof. I can't remember why, but I looked at my neighbor's house and I realized that it looked like a telescope, because the front part of the house was the regular size, but then behind it, there were these series of narrowing extensions that they had built on. And you know, I mean, like it's on a weekend, you hear the saw going because they're cutting holes in the walls to extend backwards. And that's how they manage to house their family. And so you're right. I mean, so people will figure out a way to do it out of necessity. And it is whether or not we as a society want to authorize and approve and give people the means by which they can take care of themselves with dignity and don't have to conduct themselves as though they're doing something wrong.
Exactly. And that was the personal motivation for me to take on ADUs as a state housing policy matter. And just to talk a little bit about the solution set, we can go back to the last slide, or I can just sort of hit the highlights. If we've right-sized everything about the housing market to scarcity, it means we have to touch a little bit of everything to get to having enough, right? To get to plenty. So we need to allow more housing types, including these middle housing types, allow more homes in all neighborhoods, including single family neighborhoods, commercial neighborhoods, more streamlining, more uniformity of standards across geographies so that, you know, the Oaklands and the San Jose's are not trying to provide all the housing for the 9-county Bay Area because they're the only ones willing to shoulder the work in a meaningful way that actually delivers housing as opposed to paying lip service to housing and never seeing their building permits increase by a significant margin. Third, we have got to do a hard look as government into lowering the cost of building housing. Our codes in California are complex. A lot of them are unrelated to public safety and have to do with other public missions. Perhaps some of those need to be reeled in. Certainly, the California Unique Mitigation Fee Act that allows local governments to charge unlimited amounts of money to new housing, plus inclusionary zoning, which is another whole burden on new housing, means it's just not getting done. And we've in giving communities tools to prevent housing by saying they want housing, but geez, no, we can't make them build it. Like it's somebody else's problem that it's too expensive to build in their town. We as government have to fix that. We need more streamlining, as I mentioned. We may need to start looking at our tax policy. This is going to be really hard. But if cities can only fund themselves by charging the last guy in the door $200,000 in mitigation fees and hookup charges, that means no one's going to come in the door very often unless they're very wealthy. So if we want to fix housing, we got to fix the cost stack. And we need labor and industry to be more productive. And in those solution sets, the ADU laws provide a great exemplar, right? They standardize the rules across the state for a gentle infill form that makes something people want to do legal anyway, with a streamlined process. And lo and behold, it's working. It's working everywhere across the state, north to south, east to west. Homeowners in just 3 years are building so many ADUs. Remember, these are homeowners who are not builders, who are not developers. This is not their expertise. And they are building statewide. 11% of building permits in the state of California today are ADUs. 40% of building permits in Los Angeles are ADUs. 38% of building permits in San Jose are ADUs. So out of necessity, if you give people a path, they will take it because they have to house family members, their elders, community members, or just to pay the mortgage. When you pay 50% of your income for your mortgage, you really worry about what's going to happen if you lose your job. So this is working all over the state. And as a result, industry is responding. We think probably $400 million of venture capital funding has gone into accessory dwelling unit companies, builders, factories in the last 12 to 24 months. So we've created during the pandemic, no less, where multifamily housing is all kind of stalling out in a lot of places. ADUs have increased exponentially with millions and millions of dollars of new capital invested, new jobs, new factories in California, building housing, and taking the price down from $300,000 or $400,000 a door for a specialized site-built ADU with a custom design to $50,000 a door for something that is gets delivered to your house and set up in some fashion. So we've now right-sized the plenty. Everyone can do it. It's affordable. Everyone can afford it. Industry is responding to create lots of them. That's working. And we need to kind of view that as a pilot project and how to think about getting more housing in these other building types. So it will also work, right? So multifamily will work and these other building types will work. And then other areas of law that need fixing. Obviously, CEQA needs to be on the table. I try not to always mention the 4-letter word in this slideshow, so you don't see the word CEQA on here, but realistically, streamlining and ministerial is code for CEQA reform. A ministerial permit doesn't need CEQA. The California Environmental Quality Act only applies to discretionary permits. And if we don't stop every neighbor from being able to sue on any project that requires CEQA review that is not ministerial, we will never get enough projects. It's hard. We can talk about that if folks want to, so in addition to litigation reform in CEQA so that people can't abuse the courts to challenge projects they don't like, CEQA under case law today basically vitiates the California Permit Streamlining Act, which is on the books. It says from completed application to approved project, you have a year, local government, get it done. If you don't, it's deemed approved. You lose your discretion if you don't get it done. That's what our state law says today. CEQA case law has superseded that and said, where CEQA applies, first the whole CEQA timeline runs, and then the Permit Streamlining Act 12 months runs. So effectively, in California, the sky's the limit for how much time you can take to review a project that requires CEQA review. And we're undermining our own body of state laws. So CEQA should start when the Permit Streamlining Act starts. They should not be sequential. The day there's a completed application, you should start your CEQA review and your Permit Streamlining Act deadlines, and you should be able to finish both in a year. You can have hearings on it, fine, but get your business done more quickly. No more 5 years for a CEQA process and litigation on back. Finally, these are the components of the CASA Compact, elements 5, 6, and 7. I'll kind of summarize these policy changes. Another area is we need better data about what our state laws are doing. California doesn't track how many permits applied for the density bonus, the Housing Accountability Act, the Housing Crisis Act. We have no idea. We're only tracking ADUs now because we required that it be reported under state law. So we need to require reporting. So every jurisdiction already annually reports their housing in the annual production report, APR. They should also report what state laws were applied to which housing projects, so we can track what state laws are working and not working, in addition to tracking how many units get built. And a part of that data is we got to know what people are charging to new housing. There is no uniform data set that you can track what impact fees are in Fairfield versus, pick another city, Concord or San Francisco. It's all anecdotal, and the only way to find out is to make a bunch of phone calls in each local government and call every special district separately. The Turner Center thought they'd document it statewide. They had a proposal to document the impact fees. They could only get impact fees in some cities. They couldn't get it statewide, and they could only get it for some impact fees with the budget they had. So we shouldn't be begging to get this information. Governments are enabled to charge these fees because of state laws that give them the power. So in addition for the gift of the power to charge the fees, they should report what they're charging under these various bodies of state law, including mitigation impact fees, inclusionary zoning impositions, and connection fees and charges to fund utilities.
Ms. Pinkston, let me jump in again, only because we've got about 5 to 10 more minutes for your section, and I anticipate there will be some questions. So I already see the chair of the subcommittee, Commissioner Schwamberger, is unmuted. So why don't you go ahead?
So thank you for this, and your written testimony. The detail was great. The information was great. It's obviously very complicated, and you made the point in your written testimony that that it's like this long funnel, and you have to try to impact it along the way, not just in one place. So as you look, two things. One, as you look at your list of items and your solution set, are there doable things in each one of those that would make a difference? Because it sounds like if you just attack one area, it may not make the difference you need. You have to attack all the areas. So, would there be achievable solutions for each of those? And then also, I was interested in your thoughts on the State Department of Housing and Community Development, because that's, something we're focusing on as the Little Hoover Commission, just to narrow this. We can't narrow it too much because then we're not effective. But, are there things that State Department could be doing in the near term that would help?
Sure. I think what's hard, as you rightly pointed out, housing is wicked complicated. And my point about you can't just fix one thing is to illustrate that if we're not thinking about the whole funnel, we can't ever solve for it. But I think politically, realistically, the solutions are a lot of little slices. The beauty of the ADU laws was that we could, with one swell FOOP, hit all of them. I'm not sure that play is available in some of these other bigger housing forms because they're more burdened by ADUs were illegal everywhere. So when we made them legal, we also made them ministerial. We also capped we said no impact fees over 750 square feet. And we created a standard box, 800 square feet, 16 feet tall. So we solved all the problems in one body of legislation, and it's worked. Multifamily is already so hot, controversial, so hated on by so many people, fought about by, environmentalists who want it in the cities who don't want it there, unions who want it to be all union, builders who can't afford to build all union, affordable housing people who want it all to be affordable. What you need almost is a blue ribbon committee, like the Committee to House the Bay Area at the state level, that puts all the people who fight for a living, each other, in a room and says, y'all find a solution that you can all live with that works on the math to get more housing. So, because that's, I think, required. There has to be political consensus to solve the whole problem. I do think you can't solve any problems if you don't have data. We live in a big data world. We know everything about everything and everybody. You can't tell me, nor can anyone else, how much impact fees are charged in cities across the state and how their impact fees are layered with their inclusionary housing requirements and all the other stuff they do. And what it costs to build a house in any city in the state. You should know that. That should be easily knowable, and yet no one reports the information, and the state doesn't require them to do so. So data reporting seems to me to be a minimal condition, because once you know what's going on, then maybe regulatory solutions will present themselves.
And that might be something the Housing and Community Development Department could do on its own, right? Without
I don't know
legislation.
Perhaps.
Maybe. Yeah.
I know Assemblymember Grayson has tried to run impact fee bills that included capping them. That didn't go very far. I think now he's trying to get data bill in this session, so it's possible we'll make some headway. But people like Little Hoover need to be saying, state, you have to track. You need to know what laws are being applied, what projects are using what laws. So we're not making this stuff up, and it's not anecdotal. I get emails from legislative staff saying, has the Housing Accountability Act worked anywhere? They shouldn't need to ask me that. They should be able to click a button and get a report from somebody telling them how many projects across the state were Housing Accountability Act projects, or density bonus projects, or SB 330 projects, or SB 35 projects, right? We have a whole laundry list of laws we passed. We have no idea if any of them are working or how well, except anecdotally. So that's a critical piece. And then HCD specifically does have some authority to enforce and defend state laws, as does the AG. I'm not a lawyer, so it's hard for me to say exactly how far that enforcement capacity goes. But in working with HCD on the ADU laws, they're chronically understaffed. They were getting 1,000 calls a week on ADU laws shortly after they passed. I imagine the call volume has gone up. They get daily emails from people wanting to know what this line of code means or how to apply it in this instance. I don't think they can keep up with the workflow. So better resources for staffing and some teeth in the enforcement penalties for non-performance. You know, we have the RHNA cycles are coming up, the state's Regional Housing Needs Assessment Program. Other states don't allow local governments to negotiate for what their RHNA allocation is, right? Other states say, Oregon, for example, they have statewide planning in Oregon, it's a different model. They say, thou shalt build 200,000 units, and then the locality has to go zone for it. And there's no CEQA to slow up the zoning. And if they don't do it, there's a clear penalty. If we want our cities to perform, it's like any other body of law. You need clear standards, clear expectations, clear enforcement for failure to comply. We don't really have any of those, right? We have this long, protracted, negotiated process about RHNA. In the Bay Area, 27 cities are challenging their RHNA allocation by the state. So yeah, there's work to be done in the area of, you know, state doesn't have to be in the zoning business. And there's a lot of cities who say one size doesn't fit all, and we don't want the state to tell us how to do that. Okay. It worked for ADUs, but as Commissioner Nava pointed out, they're small, you can't see them, it's gentle, this kind of, families are doing it anyway. So that's kind of a different use case. On these bigger projects, I think having cities have some authority to make up how they want to do this is fine, provided they actually get the houses built. And the game that's been played in California for years, I used to play it when I was a current planner, is you designate housing sites that you know aren't going to work, where no one really cares if the housing goes because it's far away. It's not near them. And when the housing projects actually come in, there's a big fur fight and it gets whittled down and denied. And there's never any consequence for saying my housing's going to go here, but not approving it. We've kind of tightened that up in recent years with the Housing Accountability Act, but there is more work to be done. And either HCD needs an enforcement unit that's different than the staffing they have, or more resources. I'm not sure what would be required. But if we have a whole body of laws and you don't know what's happening and you don't know if they're being implemented and there's still not enough housing, it seems like you got to start by looking at your own house and putting your own house in order, making sure your laws are clear, actionable, and have clear penalties, and there's enforcement.
Perfect. Ms. Pinkston, that is exactly the place where it makes sense for us to thank you for your testimony, your written testimony, and what you shared with us today. And much appreciated. I think it's going to give us a great deal of information to work with. I want to thank you again. Ms. Beckham, do we have another witness?
Yes, our second witness today is Debbie Arakel, who is the Executive Director for Habitat for Humanity, California. Welcome, Debbie, and when you're ready, please unmute yourself and begin your testimony.
Ms. Arakel, I believe she's on the call. Ashley, is she there? She's muted on her end, I believe. Is that correct? There, she's unmuted.
Good morning. All right, here we are. Well, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I really appreciate the commission inviting me to testify on the housing crisis in California. And I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to provide input. I'm especially encouraged by the commission's focus on increasing supply. And I enjoyed hearing the presentation from Denise this morning, as well as the comments. And I'm in line with much of what I heard, specifically producing all types of housing. My perspective is as a nonprofit affordable home ownership developer and affordable mortgage lender with Habitat for Humanity. I've pulled permits, completed home developments, and worked directly with low-income buyers. And we can certainly relate to the costs and the challenges of construction. What I'd like to do is start this morning by summarizing some of my key recommendations for the state to be able to address the housing crisis. And first off, we need to invest in affordable home production. Most solutions don't address the shortage. So again, I'm encouraged to hear that that's a recognized focus area, but we also need to establish parity by investing in the entire housing continuum. We need to include proportionate investment in affordable home ownership production, not just rental. We need to prioritize the long-term and a comprehensive, sustainable approach. And we heard a little bit about the funnel. We tend to use the housing continuum and the comprehensive spectrum of different housing needs. Right now we have a crisis, but we need to look toward a vision for California that is accessible, healthy, and includes affordable homes for all residents. And with the two housing government agencies, we do need to build capacity and capability, specifically in the Department of Housing and Community and Development. There is a lot on the backs of HCD, and they can't keep up with the program funding and the allocations that they have on their plate right now. So we need to, if we're going to be successful, we need to invest in building that capacity and that capability. We also need to provide education on the sustainable value of affordable home ownership models. There are successful models. Habitat for Humanity is one of them. There are other models, and there's a lack of understanding at all levels of government, at different agencies, and other housing organizations on the actual value of that investment. We also need to form productive state and local partnerships. We know that there's huge gaps. We know that it's not working, but we also know that there are some successful models. So we need to leverage those, understand those, and make sure that we're implementing those on a wider basis. I sincerely believe that it's incumbent on all of us, the public sector, the private sector, and nonprofit organizations to collaborate and make sure that we're developing solutions that go beyond the emergency housing needs. California, as we keep hearing, we didn't suddenly wake up to this extreme housing shortage. We fostered it slowly over decades, and our solutions need to be thoughtful and thorough. We need to consider the long-term outcomes, not the short-term fixes. And in the middle of this crisis, the most extreme, there's a lot of reason for optimism. The shortage and the high cost of housing at every income level has really elevated this issue finally as a top priority for lawmakers, for voters, for residents at all income levels, and state and local government agencies. California voter surveys actually indicate that the two neck and neck top priority issues are homelessness and affordable housing. These concerns outrank poverty, crime, education, and climate change. Additional good news is that we have an unprecedented opportunity to get this right by developing a sustainable approach. With the California state budget surplus and the commitment of $27 billion from the American Rescue Plan Act, $27 billion, the state must make responsible investments to increase total home production, make sure that we increase home affordability, and that we provide equitable access to all Californians and develop an inclusive plan that stops excluding affordable home ownership. An affordable mortgage is actually the most stable form of secure, affordable housing. Homeownership is the housing solution that continues to be overlooked in the state's investment, and it's the only solution that offers long-term permanent affordability, provides financial independence, provides an asset for the household and future generations, and specifically helps close the enormous wealth gap and the racial inequities in California housing. And this is something that the state says that we're focused and committed to correcting. So the state's investment has been and is currently almost exclusively in rental housing, and that hasn't worked. We've been doing the same thing and it's not solving the problem. Part of this is that rental housing does not build equity and it doesn't create an asset. If a family is able to become a homeowner, then they have the opportunity to save and to earn equity. And by having a healthy balance of homeowners and renters, not only the family, but the whole community thrives. Homeowners make an investment in the community. They're more actively engaged, whether they are high or low income homeowners. This is true. Homeownership is affordable housing. Rents increase, but mortgages are steady and predictable. I feel strongly that we have a moral imperative to address the housing shortage for all Californians. And California's housing investment plan needs to include the full spectrum of solutions. And I see the full spectrum as being the need to address emergency housing. We know that needs attention and investment as well. Transitional housing, affordable rental production, and affordable homeownership production. But if we continue excluding ownership production, then California's investments, all they do is continue to perpetuate the racial and wealth inequities. If lower income households only have one option, a rental, then they'll continue to be housing insecure. So again, on the bright side, with the financial resources and the will and the compelling data that we have a unique opportunity to jumpstart a transformation in California. Wanted to talk a little bit about supply. The lack of supply is truly driving the lack of affordability. And this is true at every income level. And the other implication is that it's been driving down homeownership rates across the US and in California. The shortage means a scarcity of affordable housing for households, again, at low, very low, moderate income households, and it leaves them with the fewest options. In California, 1 in every 5 households is spending at least 50% or more of their total income on housing. That's 20%. And that's considered, paying over 50% of a household's income on housing is considered severely cost burdened. Affordable is 30% or less. And the data shows that more renters are cost burdened and severely cost burdened than homeowners. In California, specifically, 27% of renters pay over 50% of their income on housing, and only 13% of homeowners pay over 50%. So homeownership is clearly an important and critical solution in the whole spectrum. It provides more affordability, it provides more stability for our communities, and unfortunately, it's going down and it's at the lowest rate since the 1940s. California's low homeownership rate is at 54.5%, which is the second lowest in the entire nation, only behind New York State. And this low rate of homeownership is disproportionately low for Black and Latinx households. The national average is 65.6%, and California is far below that. With homeownership being the #1 means of accumulating financial stability, generational assets, then it's important that we're able to increase that rate to a healthier ratio. But homeownership rates are particularly low for Black and Latinx households because partly, and in large part, because the state's ownership policies have included decades-long discriminatory and exclusionary policies. We've all heard and studied the impacts of redlining, which have excluded buyers from geographic areas and have denied access to traditional financing opportunities. According to 2019 data, only 41% of Black households and 46% of Latinx households own their homes. And again, this is in comparison to the state rate of 54.5%. The highest homeownership rate is among white households of 66%. So that leaves a large gap. So although the research and all of the evidence make the inequities clear, California isn't making any progress toward closing the homeownership gap. If anything, the gap has remained constant, or it's grown rather than shrinking over the years. The gap between communities of color ranges from 26 to 29% as compared to white households in California. So getting back to what we need to do to try to remedy the situation, many Californians, including those in state government and nonprofit affordable housing organizations, subscribe to a mindset that homeownership is reserved for people who achieve a certain level of financial success. And the thinking is that homeownership is not appropriate for some, or it's not appropriate for government investment. This line of thinking is partly to blame for why the state and local efforts to create affordable housing narrowly focuses on rental housing as the only solution. However, whether an individual believes ownership is a privilege reserved for some, the evidence points and proves the fact that increased ownership affordability is in the best interest of California. Healthy communities and healthier communities have higher rates of home ownership. Another myth is that it's less expensive to build affordable rental housing. That's not the case. For sale affordable homes are more economical to build than a lot of rental housing. So an investment in affordable home ownership achieves the long-term results that we're looking for. It increases the permanently affordable housing stock. It generates property taxes, and it sustains the homeownership program by applying mortgage payments to reinvest in housing production. This model is sustainable, and it even offers lower income buyers an opportunity to build an asset and move along the housing spectrum. One of the primary go-to solutions in the state of California to try to look at homeownership access is down payment assistance. It continues to be the go-to answer, but it doesn't do anything to address supply. The CalHFA, California Housing and Finance Agency, has a long-standing down payment program, but what it's created currently is a bidding war between qualified low-income buyers. The reality is would-be low-income buyers can't find a home that fits within their price range. So we literally see, there's an example in San Diego where there were 9 qualified low-income buyers that had been approved for down payment assistance, and they were all outbidding each other for the same single home. So if you have down payment assistance and you don't couple that with increasing the supply, then it does not solve the problem. The Habitat for Humanity homeownership model has a proven track record. I'm definitely not here to sell Habitat, but our successful affordable ownership can serve as a model. It can be replicated and it can be scalable. Habitat serves communities in all regions of California, producing and preserving affordable homes and increasing access to homeownership through affordable mortgages for low-income households. All homeowner applicants are income qualified, and they agree to partner with Habitat by participating in home buying counseling, financial counseling, and then they also participate by helping to build their homes. Every Habitat homeowner purchases their home with an affordable 30% or less affordable mortgage, and they're able to build equity. And so Habitat homeowners, in terms of just a quick demographic, Habitat households, over 15% include a veteran member of the household. 33% of Habitat households include a member with a disability. And 81% of Habitat homeowners in California are BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So we were able to work on a study this past year. The pandemic certainly tested and further proved the critical role that affordable homeownership plays in boosting a family's financial health and also fostering the educational resilience. The low-income households had stable, affordable, and not overcrowded housing. They were all better able to remain housing secure. They were able to meet their financial obligations without any assistance despite the pandemic. Statewide, less than 2% of Habitat homeowners struggled to make their mortgage payments. We're in the process of completing the findings, but the initial study demonstrates outcomes and some really inspiring evidence. We surveyed almost 700 Habitat homeowners in California. They were all low-income households. This was done in 2021, and the length of time as a homeowner ranged from less than a year to 15 plus years, and there was a balanced distribution. The homeowner responses included homeowners in rural, urban, southern, northern, and central California throughout. And so I wanted to share just a couple of visuals that highlight some of the results of the homeowner survey, because I think it's the most powerful testimony to demonstrate how affordable homeownership can work and can contribute to making sure that more households are secure, stable, and independent. So I think I'm allowed to share the screen, so let me give that a shot here. Okay, looks like that is up and running. Thank you. So post-purchase homeowner achievements. And this again is what we're all looking for a healthy California. Over 84% say that they're able to stay in the region long-term. That's stability. 84% have been able to reduce their housing costs. And over 80% have been able to increase the money that they have to put toward other necessities, education, food, health. And one of the things that we also recognize is that the impact is for generations to come. So more of the children in owner-occupied homes are able to go on to higher levels of education. And these homeowners have attested to the fact that they see better opportunities for their children. A couple of other summaries is the impact directly to the household. So almost 80% of homeowners say that they can always save for emergencies or retirement. And 73% have reported that they have upward career trajectory. And 85% say that their physical and mental health has improved. One of the biggest factors is that it eliminates the stress of wondering how you're going to come up with the rent and the burdens and not being able to save. So there's also the impact of homeownership on the community. So only 6% of the homeowners said that they plan to leave the region in the next 5 years. And as far as civic engagement, 87% of those eligible to vote have done so in the last 4 years, and 67% have volunteered in the last 2 years. The financial security that is enjoyed allows an opportunity to contribute to the community. And then not to mention, we all know that homeowners invest more in local businesses. They're part of the tax base that fuels the local economy. And then in summary, the kids and education, the households included over 400 children under the age of 18, and then almost 250 households with children and the ages, young adults, 18 to 24. And especially during the impact, what was powerful is that these households, again, that are low income, had the opportunity for their children to be able to study in a safe, secure place at home. And we know that was a challenge for every household. And then 16% of the homeowners said that they are still stressed about their children's education, but that means 84% of the households are not worried about their children's education. So it's a huge increase with the security of homeownership.
Hi, yeah, this is Pedro Nava, and let me just jump in. It seems to me, I mean, Habitat for Humanity, you build working with the families, single family homes. Is that correct? You're muted. I'm sorry. You have to unmute yourself. There you go.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
It's all home ownership, but we have higher density multifamily developments as well as single family duplexes, fourplexes. So that's one of, depending on what is appropriate for the particular area, then we do build higher density as well.
Well, see, that's good. I did not know that. But let me ask you, given that on occasion neighbors get uncomfortable with additional development because they have concerns about how it affects their potential property values. Now, how is it that Habitat for Humanity has dealt with those kinds of reactions from neighbors? Get that? Maybe you don't get that because your model is structured the way it is.
I'm glad you asked that because we do get that. And what we're able to point to is that having Habitat for Humanity work in a neighborhood and provide homeownership opportunities has resulted in home prices actually going up. It's increased the stability, it's increased the look and the feel and the pride in homeownership. So there are a lot of examples where initially the neighbors might be worried about it. There's a label put on who's going to be living here. And fortunately, the track record and the reputation of Habitat for Humanity right now, we can give an example of a partnership in Riverside with the local government. They actually borrowed Habitat to come help and do some of the public relations because the community said, if Habitat is part of this, then I know that the residents are going to be responsible. I know that it's going to be a quality development, and I know it's going to be a positive addition to the neighborhood. So gradually over time, we've been able to help change that mindset. We're not all the way there, but we have the track record to be able to show and be able to prove that it's a positive, healthy addition to communities.
Yeah, I mean, I think the brand is extraordinary. I don't think anybody will ever argue about that. And probably the single greatest ambassador you have is former President Jimmy Carter. I mean, what wonderful example for people to look to as the face of Habitat for Humanity. I also think that part of what contributes to the success is the sweat equity involvement. That when you have people who are actually working on site and contributing to the construction, you sort of have a different feel about who your neighbor is likely to be. Have you found that to be the case?
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and that's part of one of the factors with what we think is and have seen as a very successful model. You're 100% right, because we're partnering with the future buyer. It's not something that we're doing for. The homeowners have to seek homeownership. They have to want homeownership. They have to apply. They have to qualify. And then they work really hard. And then part of that builds that further partnership. And often they're getting to know their neighbors. We partner with private industry as well. And so all of that promotes a greater understanding of diverse income households, which is another hurdle to overcome, is the labels and the stereotypes that are often given to families of different incomes.
Yeah, let me, we probably got about 5-10 minutes in this segment. Let me invite any other commissioners who have some questions or comments or observations to unmute yourself. There we go. Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you. Thanks so much for your testimony and obviously for the great work that you do in the community. As you from your perspective, are there any specific things that the state could do, in particular the Department of Housing and Community Development, to increase the supply of housing? Because as you pointed out, a big problem with affordability is the lack of supply. Any specific solutions that you'd like to see the state implement?
Yeah, I thank you. I appreciate that question. And absolutely. First, we need to have additional investment in homeownership production. Between the two state housing agencies, there's only one program that affordable home ownership developers can access funding. It's the Cal Home program within Housing and Community Development. And so the state's investment has been focused on a type of housing, rental production, as opposed to the target population that needs the housing. So why should low-income households be limited to one option? So with the Cal Home program, we have had a longstanding partnership. We're appreciative of the program. It has helped us increase supply. However, that single program is woefully underfunded. And in the last cycle of funding, it was oversubscribed by 157 million, which was about 3 times the amount that was actually allocated for funding. So first and foremost, we need to recognize that affordable homeownership is an important part of the solution, and it addresses so many more benefits than just providing shelter for a household in the community. I think if I can add to that, increased education within the housing agencies. So we've met with leaders and with staff members at HCD, as well as CalHFA. And to our surprise, we discovered that there isn't a common understanding of who's even addressing homeownership aspects. And so there's a lack of understanding on how the homeownership model can and should work. There's an assumption that affordable housing equates to rental housing. So there's a lot of education that needs to be done, and it's not the staff's fault if they're not informed about the programs. But right now, even the program that is available to nonprofit ownership developers like Cal Home, it is really still tailored and designed after the rental model. So we're trying to fit into programs that aren't even adequately designed for the homeownership production model.
Yeah, I mean, this is Pedro again. You raise a good point. It is often that what Little Hoover Commission finds is no in charge. Part of what you're talking about is there's a shift that needs to be made from the notion of a rental to single family home ownership. And so in your experience, you've told us, you've given us some direction about things that we ought to look to try to fix. But do you find that you have to divide your time between different agents in order to get done what you need done?
Well, we would be happy to divide it amongst all the agencies that would provide funding for production. So we do spend a lot of time explaining and educating, and I wasn't sure how deeply we want to get into the details, but let's take the Cal Home program. Even after we've applied, there are significant delays that create a hardship, but each of our Habitat local leaders spend a lot of time explaining and educating. So there isn't a common understanding, and you're right. So we do spend a lot of time going back and forth and trying to get a common understanding. And so I think if we can continue to participate and partner, that would go a long way. And having what I keep referring to as a comprehensive solution, we can't just pick off one answer and one solution, because then it ends up being a Band-Aid.
All right, let me take a look at my commissioners. If there's any commissioners that want to ask a question, comment, now's the time, or we will thank Ms. Is it Arakel. I want to thank you for your testimony, for your presentation. So, Crystal, do we have another witness?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, our third witness today is Fanny Ortiz, who is the co-founder and board member of Fideicomiso Comunitario Tierra Libre and the treasurer of the California Community Land Trust Network. Welcome, Fanny, and please go ahead and start your testimony when you're ready.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Fanny Guzman Ortiz. And I would like to start by recognizing that I am an occupied Tongaba land, or currently known as Boyle Heights in the East Side. I am a co-founding member and board member of Fideicomiso Comunitario Tierra Libre, and I am also the treasurer for the California CLT network. Today, I'm here to share my experience working with our cohort of community land trusts, an emerging CLT ecosystem where we all resonate with a movement-led approach. A movement-led approach that centers Black, Indigenous people of color leadership and building capacity for communities to own and steward land. We are intentionally disrupting the narrative of the extractive tenant-landlord relationship by deliberately addressing the historical inequities that have impacted our communities politically and economically. But before I dive deeper into my personal experience, I like to go back into time to the first community land trust, New Communities, Inc., a community land trust rooted in a history of racial and economic justice in America. The first CLT was emerged by sharecroppers and civil rights activists in response to the exploitation of stolen land and slave labor, deeply rooted in America. New Communities, Inc. is a CLT deeply rooted in alternatives path for economic and social justice for Black, Indigenous people of color. And this is just to give you a quick lesson on what a CLT is. A CLT is a nonprofit organization that seeks to maintain the affordability of housing, and in some cases, non-housing buildings and land uses in perpetuity, by acquiring land and removing it from the speculative relationship state market. A CLT has three important functions. Community ownership to ensure land is used for the common good, not for profit. The ground lease separates the land and the structure. The ground lease secures for the land and the structure to remain affordable in perpetuity and gives tenants an exclusive right for tenants to create opportunities to have multiple options for tenant ownership through co-ops, single-family units, or multifamily units. The stewardship of the CLT allows for housing affordability, housing stability, and housing quality. CLT's governance is broken into three parts. 1/3 CLT residents, 1/3 of other community residents, and 1/3 experts and stakeholders vested in the community. In the market rate, there's a myth that a family will build wealth, but who has access? Not the working class people of color. Share equity through a CLT model, homeownership is accessible and affordable for the poor, working class, Black, Indigenous people of color. Historically, communities of Black, Indigenous people of color have been impacted by racist housing policy, like redlining, but the modern redlining is felt more so through the predatory lending and discrimination in mortgage lending. The CLT model we are emerging in Los Angeles is a CLT ecosystem that is addressing the historical inequities. We are deliberately centering racial justice, equity, and community control at every level of organizational process. Tenants are emerging in the decision-making process democratically, leading the work of transforming their communities as the most impacted by redlining policies that have kept our communities disinvested. By taking land and housing off the speculative market, we are transforming the extractive real estate practices and challenging existing assumptions about gentrification and displacements that are being portrayed as a positive thing. Fideicomiso Comunitario Tierra Libre is a grassroots community land trust founded in 2018 by community leaders with the support of Legal Aid Foundation. We are predominantly led by women of color. Our objective is to grow our infrastructure to provide services for capacity building for the membership and to decommodify housing and land to take out of the speculative market and make housing affordable in perpetuity. We are building relationships locally, regionally, and statewide to emerge a strong CLT movement with the LA CLT Coalition and the California CLT Network. Fideicomiso board structure is made up of 3 parties: lease members, community members, and general members. And in November of 2020, we passed policy at the county level to secure $14 million through our policy work to acquire at-risk housing and prevent displacement of tenants. The Simmons building was acquired through a grant of public funding and a grant from Spark due to diligence to get into escrow. We partner with the local community development corporation, which is Little Tokyo Service Center, and our sister organization, Community Power Collective, who assisted us through the acquisition process and will train us to do the asset management work. And it will help Fideicomiso Comunitario Tierra Libre implement a co-op for the tenants to take ownership of the building. In Los Angeles, we built this infrastructure, and this is why we're trying to implement the state policy. This is a public funding. These are our partners, and now imagine what we can do at the state level. We are pushing to create more opportunities for families to become CLT homeowners. In the fall, SB 1079 passed, giving tenants and nonprofits a chance to match prices at foreclosure actions. And in the spring, a tenant in a foreclosed home partnered with Northern California CLT to buy the property as the first acquisition through SB 1079. Now the California Community Land Trust Network is fighting to have the state create a program to help more tenants and CLTs buy homes at a risk of foreclosure. The Senate and the Assembly have supported the $500 million acquisition program called the Foreclosure Intervention Housing Preservation Program that would turn around displacement and create permanently affordable housing instead. Community land trusts are part of the long-term solution for our housing crisis that has been exacerbated by the pandemic, especially in our Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, where there is a long history of disinvestment and displacement. This is why we must stay committed to actual solutions like community land trusts and do what we can to stop eviction so our communities can remain and thrive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So can you give us an example, right? One of the more recent example of how you've been able to implement SB 1079. I think you made reference to it, but you were reading that, and I actually think that you're going to be able to tell us in your own voice. I mean, I'm looking at you and you're already smiling. Can you tell us in your own voice, what happened, how it happened, and who benefited?
So in Oakland, in Northern California, I forgot the lady's name and I do apologize. And I just met her. She was able to purchase her home using SB 1079, Jocelyn Foreman. And I believe that many families like her can take advantage of the public funding that was just approved by the state. But that's not enough. As I mentioned with the LACLT Coalition, we want a pilot program to expand community land trusts and to acquire buildings and also to do rehab work. And with that, we got $14 million. And we were able to purchase 7 buildings. And that means 47 families are protected from being displaced from their communities, from their home. They are going to have the opportunity to become homeowners. And that's the work we're doing as community land trusts. It's a strategic tool to prevent displacement, to invest in our communities, right? But the historical disinvestment doesn't allow us or give us the opportunity to become homeowners. And the only way we can do it is in a collective way using the Clt model.
So you have access to funds. Now, these properties that are in foreclosure, or just you buy them off market?
They're at foreclosure. As we go door knocking, we also hear the stories from tenants that are living in uninhabitable conditions. And yet they're being told by their owner that in the next 3-4 months, either they have to move out during the global pandemic or get ready to have their rents increased by $400. And so those conditions would also allow for tenants to be, say that they're at the risk of foreclosure and be able to buy the building. using the FIP funding
Got it.
by the state.
And then after the building is then purchased by the organization, and then do they transition and sell the apartments to the tenants? Is that how it works?
So there's a process. You know, the CLTA acquires the building, and I'll use our example with the first acquisition we did. We partnered with Little Tokyo Service Center to help us do the acquisition. But they're also going to be working with us in the next 3 to 5 years to do the process of, you know, integrating the tenants and teaching them about what the CLT system is all about and how they can collectively create their own guidelines and becoming owners, and also being part of the decision-making process, because this is all new to them. You
Right.
know, they've never had a landlord that took the time to involve them in the decision-making process and giving them the options of, you know, this is what needs to be fixed in your building. What do you think is, you know, that needs to get done first?
Right.
Yeah, so it's a whole process. And the important thing is that they're not gonna be displaced from their home.
Right. Commissioner Schomburger, I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your work. This is, I think, a really novel approach to keeping something affordable in perpetuity, and probably something that's underutilized throughout the state. In addition to the funding, is there anything the state could be doing to make this model you know, even more common?
Well, I mean, we need funding from all levels of the government. We need funding for philanthropy. I can give an example. We are in the process of also acquiring 3 empty lots, but it's been difficult to come up with a development because of the lack of funding, because what's available would not be affordable to our community. And so those are the challenges, you know, not having access to funding to be able to make it affordable. One, which is kind of against our mission and vision. So the lack of this investment, we also need to have policy that would support the expansion of CLTs in conjunction with funding as well.
Are there any particular policies that you know, the Little Hoover Commission could focus on to help your area?
So one of the things we've been working is on the tenants opportunity first right to purchase, which is TOPA. Right now, the LACLT coalition was able to make the, you know, they made the motion last week at the LA County, and it passed for a 90-day report. But we want to make sure that this passes at the city level as well. But we need to do the work. And we need the support for people to know that this is an opportunity for tenants to become homeowners. And so we can connect it somehow with the FIP funding and to give us those resources, because, you know, the work we're doing is being done by, you know, community leaders who may not have the capacity, but do know what's, you know, what are the needs and wants in our community. We want to make sure that we continue remaining in our communities. We want to invest in our communities. And the only way we can do it collectively is using the Clt model. And so we need policy, and we need funding, public funding at all levels. We need the funding from the American Rescue, yeah, right, and philanthropy money as well. And yeah, because we need to make sure that the work we're doing is sustainable in the long run.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments from commissioners who are participating? Commissioner Emerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little unclear. Your organization purchases buildings or properties, and then you have tenants in them. And how do they assume that ownership? I'm still a little unclear. Do they pay into your organization and then take ownership 20 years later, or how does that work?
No, the Community Land Trust is a nonprofit organization. We don't purchase buildings. Well, I mean, we just acquired the first building using public funding from the LA County. And the intention is for us to get the tenants to become members. Technically, they're members, but not officially. But to also go through the process of learning that the CLT is a tool for them, where they can strategically, in a democratic way, have a voice and a say-so. And the whole goal is for them to become owners. And we foresee that that's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years, where they're going to be able to develop a co-op so they can become owners. And the Community Land Trust will just take care of the land, will remain owners. And that will allow for the tenants to remain in their community and thrive and also invest. We would also implement a resale formula in case they want to sell. They wouldn't sell it for profit because it would continue to remain affordable for the next family. So the process is not for us to have ownership of the building for 20 years. It's, for them to become owners.
And is it, and you mentioned before, it kind of separates the structure from the land. So does the CTL continue to own the land, but the structure is the thing that becomes made affordable and owned in perpetuity by the resident?
Yes.
It's really novel. Yeah.
Yes. The land will continue being the CLT, the Community Land Trust, will still continue to take ownership of the land. It's in a way to balance, to make sure and secure that the tenants do not sell, their property and make for profit. The intention is to make it affordable and accessible for the next generations. And of course, to prevent them from being displaced, which is happening rapidly right now during a global pandemic. And it's heartbreaking to see the conditions that people are living. And the building clearly needs a lot of rehab work. And we know that we're not going to have enough funding for the rehab. And so they're going to be part of the decision-making process and deciding what should get done, first, depending on what needs are more important to sustain the building and in their homes.
So this is Pedro. So the thing that's interesting, I mean, it seems to me the model that is closest to what you're describing is what most people consider as a co-op, or residents become in that the land held by the CTL, the residents are eligible to purchase their dwellings. So part of what your organization will help with is educating the residents into what it means to be a property owner, rules under which they would continue to operate. And then this thing is telling me that it's unstable. So the rules under which they would operate. Then the model also includes how does a resident finance that they're going to buy?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part you said.
Yeah, let me say it again. How does the resident finance the unit that they are going, or maybe that's not.
So that's another issue too, because another form of redlining is having access to, loans.
Right.
Because most of the loans are like, they give you ridiculous high interest rates, right? And we see that as another form of redlining because it is not affordable for people of color to become homeowners. And so that's why we're building relationships locally, regionally, and statewide to change that narrative. And so the CLT, the Community Land Trust work is just to, change that narrative that's extractive and also educating the tenants to create their own agreements, not rules, but agreements, so they can be part of the decision-making process collectively.
All right, understood. Thank you. I turned off my video because I was getting a message that said it was unstable, so I'll just do the audio. Are there any other questions or comments from commissioners? And not seeing any. I want to thank you very much for your testimony. As Commissioner Schwamberger said, it was a very exciting approach to helping people so that, as you said, they're not displaced, so that they don't lose the security of the places where they live. And at the same time, what you can offer is an improvement in the quality of their dwelling, which I think makes a tremendous difference to people. Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for participating with us today.
Thank you.
Ethan, let me turn it back.
Mr. Chairman, by the way, your audio continues to be quite choppy, so we just caught the very tail end of that. But I believe that is our final witness today, Mr. Chairman, and we already did the public comment section of the agenda. As the commission knows, we have 2 more hearings scheduled on this topic, one on September 9th in 2 weeks, when we will be getting local government perspectives on the relationship with state government with regard to housing, affordable housing policy. And then on September 23rd, we will be hearing from state officials who are active in this area. So we're planning those hearings now, and invitations are pending, and we'll obviously be providing agendas and background information and witness bios to the commission at the appropriate time. But that is, the next hearing is in 2 weeks, also at 10 a.m. And other than that, Mr. Chairman, I believe that concludes our agenda today.
Good. I don't think commissioners are unmuted, not wanting to take the last stab at a comment. So let us conclude our meeting. I want to thank everybody for participating. Hope my audio is a little bit better. Well, soon. Thank you.
It is now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.